Let's get into some darker Christmas entertainment. Let's do it. Hey, welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well out there. And yes, last week I did my Canon Christmas reviews. I did some Canon films. I'm going to get back to some Canon films. I'm going to do Murphy's Law, Death Wish 5. I'm going to complete my Death Wish series, and I'll do another one. But this week, I was thinking about it over the weekend. I'm going to do a couple darker Christmas entertainment titles. And I was thinking about something, the Tales from the Crypt series. One of my top 3 favorite episodes from that series was And All Through the House. As a matter of fact, this episode was the second episode aired when the first season was released the summer of '89. Matter of fact, this episode aired June 10th of 1989. It's only 22 minutes long, which most Tales from the Crypt episodes were like between 20 and 30 minutes long, which is all they really needed. And that's all this one needed. It's short and sweet and to the point, and it's really all you could ask for. And this one, Tales from the Crypt, when it came around, it had a lot of heavyweights, Hollywood heavyweights behind it. I mean, producing the show was Richard Donner, who was on fire at the time with the Lethal Weapon series. He produced Lost Boys, The Goonies. He directed. I mean, he had Superman in the 70s, The Omen. I mean, Richard Donner was huge then. Walter Hill, Joel Silver, who was one of the biggest producers in Hollywood around these times, and Robert Zemeckis, who was one of the biggest filmmakers around this time, coming off of the Back to the Future trilogy. And speaking of Robert Zemeckis, he directs this episode. And the guy who wrote this episode is none other than Fred Dekker. Fred Dekker is very familiar with horror fans because he wrote and directed The Great Night of the Creeps with the great Tom Atkins. And he also co-wrote with Shane Black and directed The Monster Squad, which is a horror fan staple. I like that film a lot as well. And he went on to do other projects. He did RoboCop 3, which I don't really like that film. But he co-wrote The Predator, which, again, wasn't that great either. But Fred Dekker's still, a horror favorite. And in this episode, we have Mary Ellen Trainor as the wife. We have a small cast here because that's all you need. And Mary Ellen Trainor is very recognizable because she was the mother in The Goonies. She did a lot of films with Joel Silver in bit parts. She was the psychiatrist in the Lethal Weapon series. She was the one always giving Riggs a hard time about, you got problems, I want to talk to you. He always avoided her. She was a newswoman in Die Hard. She was in Executive Decision. She was in a lot of big films, and she's very recognizable. We have Marshall Bell. He's not in this episode very long, maybe 30 seconds, and he has a few lines before she does what she does. He plays the husband. And Marshall Bell was in Starship Troopers, Total Recall. He was the scumbag coach in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. And we also have Larry Drake as the demented Santa. And Larry Drake was no stranger to horror. He had done, a couple years after this, he was the demented Dr. Giggles. He was in Night of the Scarecrow back in '79, and he was in Darkman. Now, I know Darkman's not a horror film, but he was also in Darkman as Durant. And we have a little girl who plays the daughter, but those are the 3 main characters. And pretty much this episode takes place all on Christmas Eve. We see the snow outside. We see the Christmas lights. There's Christmas carols. And then we see her husband sitting on the couch, and he asks for the fire poker. Not in a very polite way, but he asks for it. And the wife has it, and she's standing behind him, and she buries it in his head. And he slumps forward. And we find out this is her plan. She's been planning on killing her husband. She had just put her daughter to bed right before she did this. And she calls her lover, because she has a lover, and she gets his answer machine. She leaves a message saying that it's done and all the money is theirs and she can't wait to blah, 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 spend their lives together, And she puts a bag over her husband's head to keep the blood from going everywhere. And she starts dragging his body out the door. And the camera's in the house, fixed on her, pulling the body away from the house out and, out the door, off the porch and into the snow. Snowing like crazy. And while the camera's watching her, we're watching her pull the body on the radio that's playing Christmas carols, which they stop and they have a news report and they mention about how an escaped lunatic has escaped from the mental institution. He has killed several people and he's dressed as Santa Claus. See where this is going. And she's trying to get her husband to the well. She's going to dump the body in the well that's out from the house. And there's this wood pile next to her with an axe there. And all of a sudden she starts hearing jingle bells. And she starts yelling, is anybody there? And she realizes she has bells on her front door. And she kind of blows it off. And the door happens to close and lock her out. In the meantime, she turns around and there's a demented Santa Claus holding an axe. And she struggles with him. She gets away and gets back in her house. She gets into the door. She has a lot of problems with doors in this episode, even though it's only 22 minutes long. And while he smashes through a window and grabs her, while the cops are calling, they leave a message saying they're going to do a house to house. They're going to come by and see everybody and make sure everybody keeps their doors locked. And she knocks him out with the axe. She gets to control the axe and hits him in the head with it, not with the pointy end, and knocks him out in the snow. And she calls 911, but she stops and she hangs up because she realizes it's not as simple as just telling the cops she needs the cops, because she killed her husband. And so she hangs up the phone, and then finally she figures it out that she could blame the escaped lunatic. She'll bury the axe in her husband's head, and she'll just blame this lunatic for killing her husband, and it'll make it so much more simpler. And so she goes outside and hits her husband in the head with the axe, but by this point, the escaped lunatic is up and walking around again. And we see her, the camera shows her daughter's room, and the window's ajar. And she goes in the house, and she calls the cops. She finally decides to call the cops because she realizes that he's alive. And she locks him out, and she calls the cops, and they go, "Do you have a weapon?" She goes, yeah, my husband has a gun. So she goes and gets the gun. She goes in this closet, and this is where the second door fails her. The door closes behind her and locks her in the closet. She can't, the camera angle is perfect from Zemeckis. It's looking down from behind the gun. She can't get it. She's just too short to get to the gun. Meanwhile, this ladder comes up. There's a window in the closet, and he starts climbing up the ladder, and she dawns on her that her daughter's window's ajar. So she starts freaking out. She can't get out of the closet. She starts screaming. And the daughter wakes up and goes to the window and goes, "Oh, Santa, I've been waiting for you. I'm so glad you're here." And she's reaching out the window trying to grab his hand. Now, he can't reach her. The ladder's too short. So the mom finally busts through the door, goes upstairs. Daughter's gone. Window's wide open, and she's freaking out. Then she hears her daughter yelling for her. She runs downstairs, sees her daughter standing there, and she's relieved. But the door behind her daughter's wide open, and out around the corner holding her daughter's hand is Larry Drake's demented Santa, and she starts screaming. And her daughter's like, "Look, I let him in. Santa's here." And Larry Drake says, "Naughty or nice," and that's pretty much the end of the episode. We cut to the Crypt Keeper, and we got to wrap up, and that's the end of the episode. This is one of my top 3 favorite Tales from the Crypt episodes. Now, it's been a long time since I've seen every episode. I have the first 2 seasons, the first 2 box sets for the first 2 seasons, and I haven't watched those in forever. I haven't seen this episode in a while, but it's always been one of my favorites. It's always left an impression. So I've always really liked this one. And now, the set design's great. I mean, most of these were shot on sets in a studio. And they do a nice job of dressing it up to make it look like it's outside. You can tell it's a set, but they do a nice job with it. Zemeckis directs it nicely. The actors give it their all. It's a fun episode. It's not overly gory. Yes, there's blood. There was definitely other episodes down the line that are way more gorier than this one. This one has some blood in it, but mostly it's about this mom trying to keep this psychopath away from her and her daughter. And I would give this episode a 9 out of 10. I really enjoy this episode. It's one of my favorite Tales from the Crypt episodes. Have you ever seen... Oh, by the way, before I get into that, speaking of Tales from the Crypt, I got to give a shout out to my good buddy Dale and his buddy Chuck. They have a podcast called Bat and Spider. I know I've given a shout out to him before, but they're going through every episode of the Tales from the Crypt series. And they drop that usually on a Sunday or a Monday, usually about a half-hour long podcast, and they do a deep dive on each episode. So I highly recommend, if you're a fan of Tales from the Crypt like I am, check them out on wherever you get your podcast. Their podcast is called Bat and Spider. Those guys are very fun to listen to. Those guys are awesome, and they're doing every episode of the Tales from the Crypt franchise. So I want to give a shout out to those guys. They're awesome. Have you ever seen this episode? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Hit the thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video. I greatly appreciate it. I will be back later in the week with Silent Night, the remake from Silent Night, Deadly Night. And until then, I hope you're all doing well out there, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.